Good evening. My name is Isabelle Teare with the WTJX NewsFeed, and this is Trial Watch. Today was the second day of the case, the United States of America versus Ray Martinez and Jenifer O'Neill. Anyone who tuned in yesterday will know that yesterday was dominated by jury selection, but today was when we really dove into things. We saw bank statements, we saw invoices, text messages, we heard recordings, we saw photos. This was a jam-packed day, so I'm going to do my best to get through this with you. Okay, let's dive in. So before court started today, people showed up, and there was actually a good number. Oh, we were back in the courtroom today. I just want to make that note. We were allowed back into the actual courtroom where the proceedings were happening. And Jenifer O'Neill had a little group of people there to support her. And then Ray Martinez's wife was also there sitting. These groups were separate though. And before court started, I saw Ray Martinez speaking with his wife, and the defendants were interacting with these groups. Then the judge entered the courtroom, and before the jury was called in, he asked both of the defendants if they had had a chance to review any plea offers from the United States. Both defendants said they had. And then he said, "And you are prepared to proceed notwithstanding that offer?" They said yes. This is basically just the judge saying, you're aware that there are plea deals on the table from the United States, and you're choosing not to accept them. Both defendants said yes. Then the jury entered the courtroom. The judge introduced himself, the attorneys introduced themselves, and the judge then went forward with giving the jury kind of a repeat of some of the instructions we heard yesterday. After that, we moved right into opening arguments by the United States. Those opening arguments were done by a federal prosecutor, Charisse Amaro. And before I tell you more about it, I do want to say as a side note, Amaro did used to work for Jenifer O'Neill as her legal counsel during a certain part of O'Neill's tenure at OMB. Okay, but back to her opening statement. So Amaro looked at the jury and said that this was a case about fraud, greed, and calculated corruption carried out by two of the most powerful officials in the territory. She said that Ray Martinez accepted nearly $100,000 in benefits. Then he awarded a $1.4 million contract to Monethos. And then he started inflating invoices, all to pay for his personal expenses. Then she talked about Jenifer O'Neill. She said that O'Neill was the gatekeeper of federal funds and that she knowingly joined the scheme when she approved an inflated invoice by $70,000. And that O'Neill got $17,000, a little over that actually, of that $70,000 inflation for her lease with her coffee shop in Yacht Haven Grand called Java Grand. Amaro said that this case was a classic example of officials putting themselves first, using federal dollars to enrich themselves. She also said that Jenifer O'Neill, through her role as controlling the flow of money across the entire Virgin Islands government, that she was exceptionally powerful and therefore exceptionally dangerous. She then started talking about David Whitaker, who is the government contractor who used to run the company Monethos Pro Support. And I'm going to just call that Monethos as we move forward. Amaro said that David Whitaker was not a good man. She said that the United States didn't shy away from that in their case. She said that he's pled guilty to his crimes and he's admitted what he's done, but that he's also going to testify to his involvement in those crimes and also the involvement of Ray Martinez and Jenifer O'Neill. Amaro said that the scheme that the jurors were going to hear about began in November of 2022 and stretched through June of 2024. And I'm not going to dive into every point she made in her opening arguments because we're going to hear all about that in detail throughout the rest of trial watch. So what I do want to say though is that she really leaned on telling the jury that all of these things were calculated corruption. And then she said that when Ray Martinez found out that he was being investigated by the FBI, that he called and told David Whitaker to destroy his phone, to destroy his laptop and other evidence, and, to try to cover this up. She looked right at the jury and said, this was the commissioner of the Virgin Islands Police Department who was doing this, who was instructing Whitaker to destroy evidence. Think about that, she said. Then it was time for Ray Martinez's attorneys to give their opening arguments, but they actually did not. That's their right. They reserved their opening arguments. So we moved on to the opening arguments of Dale Lionel Smith on behalf of Jenifer O'Neil. And it's important to pay attention to his opening arguments because they became a topic of conversation with the judge later on today that we're going to get back to. Dale Lionel Smith opened by saying, do not be mistaken for 1 second that Jenifer O'Neil and Ray Martinez are together in this because they're both defendants. He said they were not together in this scheme. He said that the opening statement of the United States that the jury had just heard was not what happened. He compared it to as if the jury had read a book with a bunch of pages ripped out, that they weren't getting that they were getting an incomplete story. He said Jenifer O'Neil did not commit any of these crimes, and that what the jury was going to hear about was the two people who did. He said that Jenifer O'Neil was not involved with Ray Martinez or with David Whitaker's conspiracy. And he said one of the ways that the jury was going to know that is because when the investigation started and Ray Martinez started trying to get the story straight with David Whitaker, that they never called Jenifer O'Neil to do that. He said they didn't call her because they didn't have to. She wasn't a conspirator. A quick side note here. During his opening statements, Dale Lionel Smith did accidentally call Jenifer O'Neil Jennifer Lopez. He didn't catch it, but I looked over at O'Neil and she was laughing and she made eye contact with me and mouthed, "That's not my name." Okay, then just going back through here. Oh, he went on to really reinforce that O'Neil did not knowingly participate in any conspiracy. He said that every employee at the Office of Management and Budget assisted David Whitaker unwittingly, and that Jenifer O'Neil was one of them. He said, again, this was a scheme between David Whitaker and Ray Martinez, that David Whitaker was stealing and splitting it with his co-conspirator, and they were not telling Jenifer O'Neil that they stole this money, and they were giving her a cut of stolen money. Okay, that was the end of his opening argument. And so we then moved on to the United States calling their first witness. We said yesterday we thought it was going to be Lisa Alejandro, and it was. Lisa Alejandro is the current commissioner for the Department of Property and Procurement, which I'm going to be calling P&P throughout the rest of this. She was direct examined by attorney Alex Dempsey for the United States. She said that she has worked as the commissioner for P&P for 2 years and 10 months. I'm going to skip over a good amount of this because the basic point of Alejandro's testimony and questioning by Alex Dempsey was about procedures in P&P and how things are supposed to work. Alex Dempsey did ask her if she recalled a contract with Monethos. She said yes, she did. And when asked if she signed those documents, she said she did. He then introduced an exhibit, the attorney did, and this was a letter about the proposed contract with Monethos. And the point of introducing this letter was to say that the contract, which was for $1,489,000, was awarded through ARPA funding. That's federal funds. ARPA is the American Rescue Plan Act. These were federal funds given to the territory for COVID-19 relief. Then Alex Dempsey closed out his questioning of Lisa Alejandro by asking if she had known that someone had been basically paid to sign that contract, would she have signed it herself? She said no. And when asked why not, she said, because that is illegal. Then there was a quick break so that everyone could, get a snack, do what they needed to do. And when we came back, Michael Ware showed up in the courthouse. Michael Ware is the current director of the Virgin Islands Waste Management Authority. I noticed that he came in and he sat with Jenifer O'Neill's family and friends who were there. When I asked him if he was there to support O'Neill, he said yes, he was there to support her, that she was his friend. Then we had the cross-examination of Lisa Alejandro by Ray Martinez's attorney. His name's Miguel Oppenheimer. And the focus of Oppenheimer's cross-examination was the fact that this contract between the Virgin Islands Police Department and Monethos was actually a legitimate contract, because PNP had been given all the documents they needed to sign off on this. And the question that kept coming up throughout the rest of Alejandro's testimony was, who was it that was supposed to vet Monethos and Whitaker in this whole process? A side note, an observation, Lisa Alejandro, during her testimony, she appeared calm and composed on the stand. Her answers were confident, and she never seemed flustered, in my opinion. Then Oppenheimer, or Martinez's attorney, asked her and said, there were layers of review and vetting that had to happen with these contracts, weren't there? She said, yes. He said, there were a lot of eyes looking at these contracts, weren't there? She said, correct, there were. He then talked about how Monethos had complied with all the steps they needed to get the contract approved. She said they had. And when asked if she had reviewed all of these, she said, yes, she had. Then Oppenheimer asked her if she was aware of the Monethos representative that was involved in drafting and reviewing this contract. She said she couldn't remember. They then talked about some of the Monethos invoices that had come in for approval through property and procurement before the official contract with VIPD was signed. And he asked Lisa Alejandro if these invoices that came in were paid based on justification letters because there was no contract. She said, yes, they were. So he then asked her, wasn't it true that your team at PNP told VIPD that Monethos needed to get a contract because the services were becoming regular? Now, I'm just going to backtrack very quickly because I skipped over some procedural stuff. What they're talking about here is that before Monethos had a contract, they were submitting invoices that needed to be approved by PNP and other people. And the way they got approved was through justification letters because there was no official contract in place. Now, there are government vendors can do this without a contract, but it's limited. They're only supposed to do this for urgent or emergency circumstances. Anytime a government agency demonstrates that there's a need, an ongoing need that a vendor is continuously filling, that vendor has to have a contract. So Lisa Alejandro explained this. She said, yes, she had told VIPD that they needed a contract with Monethos because these invoices were becoming more and more regular. And she said that PNP would not approve any more invoices without a contract. We then had the cross-examination of Lisa Alejandro by Dale Lionel Smith. That's the attorney for Jenifer O'Neill. And he asked her, did you ever become aware that David Whitaker was a convicted felon? Lisa Alejandro said, yes, she did become aware, and that she couldn't remember exactly when specifically she did, but she knew it was after that contract was signed. Then Alexander Dempsey for the United States did a quick redirect where he asked her if she relied on the assertions of, the author of these justification letters when approving them. She said, yes, she did. And Dempsey asked her, do you expect the user agency to do their due diligence in vetting a vendor? She said, yes, she did. And so what really was coming out in Alejandro's testimony and all of the questioning was that, nobody was really sure whose job it was to vet or do background checks on these vendors. The kind of idea of if everyone's watching, no one is, because it seemed like all of the agencies were kind of relying on other agencies to do certain things. Then that was the end of Lisa Alejandro's testimony, and we moved on to the United States calling their second witness, and this is the lead witness, the one we've heard so much about, David Whitaker, the person who formerly ran Monethos. He entered the courtroom. He was wearing a black suit, carrying a water bottle. He had on a blue shirt and a blue tie. And when he walked into the courtroom and sat down in that witness stand, I noticed that Ray Martinez was looking directly at him. Whitaker then said that he moved to the Virgin Islands in 2021 and that he stopped running Monethos in April of 2024. The United States asked if he worked for VIPD in 2022. He said he did. And they asked if, in working with VIPD in this time, did he get to know the police commissioner, Ray Martinez? He said yes. He did. And then Alex Dempsey asked him to identify Ray Martinez. At this point, David Whitaker didn't point, but he looked across the courtroom at Ray Martinez, described him, what he was wearing. Ray Martinez was looking right back at him. It was a moment in court today. So then Alex Dempsey asked if Whitaker understood, the process of how invoices got paid to Monethos. Whitaker said yes, he would submit an invoice to the government. Then the government would give it to the user agency, VIPD, for approval. After approval, then it would go out to the next agency to have the funds, released and sent to his company. Dempsey then asked if these invoices were always paid on time. And David Whitaker said no, they weren't. So Alexander Dempsey then asked what happened and what was significant in November of 2022. Now, if we go back to Charisse Amaro's opening arguments, we'll remember that she said that's when the scheme began. And so David Whitaker said that in November of 2022, Monethos had not been paid for several months, that there were several outstanding invoices. So he went to have a conversation with Ray Martinez at Ray Martinez's restaurant, which was Don Filito's cook shop. And he said that during that conversation, he asked why these invoices hadn't been paid, and that Ray Martinez told him they hadn't been paid because he was busy with this restaurant and he didn't have time to be at work. So Whitaker said that he then offered to help Martinez with his restaurant expenses. Then we saw an invoice get pulled up, a bank statement for the Monethos company that showed $3,000 paid to KLR Services. KLR is a kitchen supply company on island. And when asked what this was for, Whitaker said restaurant equipment for Ray Martinez's restaurant. And when asked why he bought that, he said so that Ray Martinez would pay my company's invoices. Now, it's important to note that first transaction we see was on November 28th of 2022. The day after that transaction, the day after it's, the $3,000 goes to KLR for this equipment, Ray Martinez sent a justification letter for the Monethos Pro Support invoices from Ray Martinez to Anthony Thomas, who was then the Commissioner of Property and Procurement. 10 days after Martinez sent that justification letter, the invoices were approved, and we were shown 3 invoices totaling over $70,000 that were then, put into Monethos's bank account. This just shows, how quickly things were able to get done when Martinez did, finally send that justification letter and put pressure on this process moving forward. Dempsey then asked Whitaker, after these invoices were approved, did you continue buying equipment for Ray Martinez? Whitaker said, yes, he did. And Dempsey then asked, after you bought this equipment, did you also continue working for VIPD? Whitaker said, yes, he did. Then there was several minutes ongoing of Alex Dempsey introducing and publishing, numerous invoices from Monethos to Ray Martinez and VIPD, just, showing that this was this ongoing relationship, multiple exhibits. Dempsey then asked Martinez during this time when these invoices, you were submitting these invoices to VIPD, you were also continuing to purchase equipment for Ray Martinez. Whitaker said yes. And he also said that he became concerned about this as, it continued happening. And when Dempsey asked him why, he said, well, because I was paying the commissioner of the Virgin Islands Police Department and it was starting to feel like bribery. So what Dempsey asked, what did you do? And Whitaker said he proposed that to Ray Martinez a fake agreement for something called stakeout to justify the purchases. And then we were shown this agreement that was signed by both David Whitaker and Ray Martinez about this show that Whitaker was allegedly paying Martinez to do, where he would cook in his restaurant while talking about cold case files. But the prosecution said, but this never happened. This was all, faked, a cover up, wasn't it? And David Whitaker said yes. And just an interesting point I observed, this agreement for the stakeout show was signed on April 1st, April Fool's Day, by both of those parties. Then we moved on to the prosecution introducing more ways that Whitaker started supporting Martinez. We were seeing multiple bank statements and wire transfers going through. One of them was for almost $7,000 that Whitaker sent to TMZ Construction Company. Whitaker said this was the company that Ray Martinez was using to build his restaurant. And when asked why he paid it, Whitaker said that Martinez had asked him to, and in exchange, Martinez was approving the invoices. Dempsey then asked if there was anyone else that Whitaker was sending money to during this time on behalf of Ray Martinez. Whitaker said yes, that he was also sending money to the account of Diana Martinez. Now, this is Ray Martinez's wife who was sitting in court today that I explained earlier. We then saw more expenses sent to Diana Martinez, $1,000 here, $4,000 there. These were for things like reimbursements for expenses for the cook shop, payroll for TMZ construction workers, etc. Now, we then took a break for lunch. And after lunch, when we came back to the courtroom, before the jury was called in, the judge addressed something. And remember when I told you to pay attention to Dale Lionel Smith's opening arguments, because we were going to talk about it later? This is what I was saying. So the judge started by saying that after those opening arguments, there'd been a sidebar. We didn't hear this. This was when we found out about this. But during that sidebar, Ray Martinez's attorneys made a motion for severance in the case, to sever the case of Ray Martinez from that of Jenifer O'Neill. And he denied this motion. The judge did. And he said he denied this motion for two reasons. One, because it was untimely. And then let me explain the second reason. So during Dale Lionel Smith's opening arguments, he spoke about how Jenifer O'Neill was not a co-conspirator and that it was Ray Martinez and David Whitaker who were. Now, I spoke to an attorney about this to kind of explain all of this more simply. But what the attorney explained is that because this was the argument, that Ray Martinez's attorney was making in this motion for severance, that because Jenifer O'Neill's attorney had kind of accused Ray Martinez of something in that opening statement, that Ray Martinez needed to be able to question his accuser, Jenifer O'Neill. But because they're co-defendants, they can't call her to the stand as a witness. So they're moving to sever the case because they say they need to be able to question Jenifer O'Neill. The judge denied this, I said, because it was untimely, but then also because he said statements made in an opening argument are not evidence. And so that he wasn't going to approve it, and that severance was a very difficult burden to overcome. He also said that in any case involving conspiracy, you're almost always going to, have one co-conspirator claim a lesser role in it. So after he denied this motion, then the jury was called into the courtroom, and the direct examination of David Whitaker by the United States continued. Alex Dempsey asked what happened in May 2023. And Whitaker says that he went to Boston with Ray Martinez. You're going to hear about Boston a lot throughout this trial. There were 3 trips in total so far that we've been told about. And these trips were very lavish. We saw a lot of invoices for things like luxury suites costing, we'll talk about the exact numbers, but luxury suites, baseball games, floor seats for Celtics games, things like that. So we then saw exhibits introduced, and they were credit card statements from May of 2023 to pay for one of these trips. But what you need to note is that these credit card statements were the credit card statements of someone named Jafari Daniel. Now, Jafari Daniel, it was an employee for Monethos Pro Support, but he is also the son of Jenifer O'Neill. So during we saw his credit card statements because Jafari Daniel is actually the one who purchased a lot of these things. One of them was tickets, first-class tickets, for $1,500 each for Ray Martinez and David Whitaker. And Whitaker explained that what would happen was Jafari Daniel would pay for a lot of these Monethos expenses on his credit card so that he could benefit from the miles he earned, and then Monethos would, pay him back. So we then saw a bank statement from Monethos for a withdrawal of $7,500. Whitaker said that money he took out in cash so that him and Ray Martinez could gamble and, for any other expenses they had while they were in Boston. When asked where they stayed, he said they stayed at a hotel called the Encore Boston Harborview. It's a luxury 5-star hotel. And the charges for this hotel were once again put on the credit card of Jafari Daniel. Now, sorry, let me just catch up with my notes here. A lot going on. We then also saw the first photo that had been introduced as evidence. This was a photo dated May 15th of 2023. And it's a photo of Ray Martinez in the living room suite of this luxury hotel. He's standing in front of a wall of windows in a very, very large living room with very nice furniture, and he's kind of backlit. So then Dempsey continued questioning and said, during this time that you're traveling to Boston, was Monethos still submitting invoices to VIPD? Whitaker said yes. We then saw, a outgoing wire transfer for $10,000 to Monethos. Or excuse me, let me backtrack. We then saw a wire transfer for more than $10,000. But this wire transfer was actually to TMZ Construction again. This was once again the company that was building Ray Martinez's restaurant. We then talked about what they did in Boston. Whitaker said that they went to the Celtics game, that they gambled, that they got floor seats at the Celtics games. And as anyone probably knows, these are very expensive tickets. We saw StubHub receipts, again, on Jafari Daniel's credit card for $9,000, $4,000, $2,000, all at this Celtics game. Now, Alex Dempsey then asked, during this whole time, what was going on in terms of his work, Whitaker's work with VIPD. And Whitaker said that they were beginning to discuss getting a bigger contract with VIPD. We're moving away from just those sporadic invoices into this big contract that we talked about in Lisa Alejandro's testimony. They then go back to Boston. Again, luxury flights. We see bank statements. They stay at the Encore Hotel again. They go to a Red Sox basketball game, and the charge for this Red Sox baseball game. Sorry, not a sports person here. But they go to this Red Sox baseball game, and the credit card statement of Jafari Daniel shows that they bought a suite for $6,600, for that baseball game, and that they paid over $1,000 for catering to go into that suite at the baseball game. We then saw a photo of Ray Martinez with certain people who were identified as his family, smiling in that suite overlooking the stadium. And then we saw the invoice for a very expensive dinner at a restaurant called Rare Steakhouse. We're going to hear about Rare Steakhouse a lot just because Whitaker and Martinez joke around about it a lot in text messages and recorded phone calls down the line. They went to dinner on August 6th of 2023 in Boston, where Whitaker spent over $1,000 on a dinner for just himself and Martinez. After this trip, he gets back to St. Thomas, and Whitaker then sent $11,500 to Diana Martinez. We saw these statements, and when asked what it was for, Whitaker said that this was because Ray Martinez had asked him to pay for the rent for the new house that he was moving into. Then we started talking about the contract with VIPD. And Whitaker said that it got finalized when it was signed by Governor Bryan in October of 2023. And then the prosecution asked Whitaker about whether or not, the nature of payments to Monethos changed after he was now being paid through, this contract. And Whitaker said yes. In September of 2023, they did change because the money was now coming in through a government-awarded contract rather than the justification letters. He said also at that time period, though, he was approached by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, this is in September of 2023. He said the FBI came to his office and were asking him questions about an unrelated crime. We, the jury doesn't know this, but we outside, anyone who's been following this, know that that unrelated crime was about all of those devices that were planted in government offices. So they questioned him about this, and then Whitaker said that the FBI asked if he wanted to tell them anything else, and he said that he then went and told them all about this scheme that was continuing to unfold with Martinez. Dempsey then started questioning Whitaker about his history. He asked if Whitaker was a convicted felon. Whitaker said yes, he was. He had pled guilty to a wire fraud scheme in 2008. He said he was sentenced to 5 years, but that he did receive a lesser sentence because he had entered into a plea deal. Dempsey then asked if he had recently pled guilty to 3 charges in the Virgin Islands. Whitaker said yes, that those were for 1, planting those cameras, 2, PPP loan fraud. That was the payment protection program during COVID. And then third thing he has pled guilty to is, this bribery and wire fraud scheme that we're talking about in this case. Then the prosecution started questioning him about whether or not he had been promised anything by the United States for his testimony. And he said no, he had not been promised anything other than that the United States would inform the judge at his sentencing that he had cooperated. The point the United States is trying to make here is that they haven't told Whitaker, oh, we're going to reduce your sentence or do anything because you cooperated. But they said, yes, he is doing this because he's hoping that's the case. Now, just remember that whole narrative is very important to the defense's case about how Whitaker is a repeat offender who does illegal things, gets caught, cooperates to get a reduced sentence, and then goes right back into criminal activity. That's what the defense is saying. So then Dempsey asked if Dempsey asked if Whitaker, now cooperating with the FBI, if he had recorded any phone calls with Ray Martinez. Whitaker said, yes, he had. And this is when we started hearing what was, I believe, hours of, played recorded phone calls throughout different time periods. So I'm going to just kind of read to you, not from every single one, but from certain notable ones. And I'm going to read my best attempt at the quotes from these conversations. So for this next conversation I'm about to talk about, it was a call between David Whitaker and Ray Martinez. And they begin the conversation by talking about a grill that David Whitaker had bought for Ray Martinez's house. Ray Martinez says, "Don't forget that that grill is big. The guys can borrow my truck to pick it up and put it in the carport because, excuse me, that shit is huge and it's going to take up a lot of space in your office." They start laughing, and then Whitaker asks, "I get the first steak." Ray Martinez says, "Yeah, all right." Then Whitaker says, "Also, I'm looking at 3 or 4 other grills and freezers that are a little bit cheaper." Martinez says, "Are those walk-ins?" Whitaker says, "Yes." And they're talking about equipment for the restaurant. Ray Martinez says, "I got to get Diana off my back. She thinks I'm just dropping stuff and not messing around and paying attention to the business." Diana is his wife. And Whitaker then says jokingly, "And you have to pay your contractor." Martinez then says, "I'll have Jason sign off tomorrow, and then I'll have Sandra fast track it." And then Whitaker says, "Yeah, and it goes to Jenifer after." Whitaker then jokes around and says, "Sandra was really nice to me after I got the contract," and they start laughing. I'm not sure who Sandra is, but this is obviously a conversation about Ray Martinez pushing through invoices for Whitaker. And Whitaker in return buying certain things for the restaurant. The next conversation we heard was a conversation about tuition payments that David Whitaker paid for Ray Martinez's children to attend private school. We hear Whitaker say, "How much is it?" Ray Martinez says, $4,136. Whitaker says, "Oh, it's like Harvard almost." Ray Martinez says, "Wait, what's that?" He didn't hear. Whitaker says, "I said they could almost be at Harvard for that." Ray Martinez says, "Yeah, no freaking lie." Whitaker says, "And that's for one or two of them?" Martinez says, "That's for both." Whitaker then says, "We'll figure out the kids' tuition in the next day or so. We're still waiting on payment." And he says, "Jafari said his mom's the one that pays these now." Remember, they're talking about Jafari Daniel. That's the son of Jenifer O'Neill, who works for Monethos at this point. We then go into another audio recording, and this one is between David Whitaker and Jenifer O'Neill on October 19th of 2023. And throughout this recording, O'Neill sounds very jovial. There's laughter. She's friendly. They're having a back and forth, friendly, friendshipy conversation. Whitaker says, "Did you look at the coffee shop?" O'Neill says, "Yeah, I did. Charlie sent me some videos. I took Jafari. He's like, 'Yo, mom, you should do it.'" When she's talking about Charlie, she is talking about Charlie Irons, who works for Yacht Haven Grand, which is where the lease for a coffee shop is. O'Neill says, "Charlie says that other people are looking at it." Whitaker says, "Have Jafari put a business plan together." And O'Neill very excitedly says, "Yeah, I told him to do that." They then start talking about a coffee shop in Vegas, Las Vegas, that O'Neill was saying, she was getting inspiration from, I believe, for her coffee shop. She said, speaking of her older son, she said, "He said that this is fire and we should follow suit," talking about that Las Vegas coffee shop. She said, "We can do coffee, tea, champagne, like mimosas." Jenifer O'Neill then says, "Charlie wants the same thing. He wants 3 months, and then that's the deposit." Whitaker says, "So how much is rent?" O'Neill says, "About $7,000, so about $21,000 for the down payment." Whitaker then says, "Okay, well, did you get that bill paid?" We then hear Jenifer O'Neill get very animated. She seems kind of frustrated. She's like, "What? I sent an email to them this morning saying that things from ARPA need to get paid." ARPA is, the federal funding source for this contract. She said, "I'm making sure they pay that shit tomorrow. I will text the commissioner right now." She then says, "I am not playing with them. I am not playing." Dempsey then, after we heard this recording, asked Whitaker, "Did you pay did the way that you paid Ray Martinez change after getting the government of the Virgin Islands contract. Whitaker said yes. Once they had the contract in place, they started putting line items on the invoices that were submitted for things that Jenifer O'Neill and Ray Martinez wanted. We then heard another audio recording. This was on November 3rd, 2023. It was between David Whitaker and Ray Martinez. Whitaker says, and if you don't care, what I think I'd like to do is, since Mario has not signed that invoice and gotten all of these and we have all of these expenses coming up, and Martinez says, oh yeah, I'll sign that shit my damn self. Whitaker says, yeah, I can just send you a new one and add a little to it. Martinez said, yeah, that's fine. Whitaker says, with all the stuff we've got to pay for going up there and everything, they're talking about going up to Boston, I'd just like to get some extra money in the kitty. Martinez says, yeah, I'm good with that. They then sidebar in this recorded conversation. It was a long conversation. And they start talking about Jenifer O'Neill. Whitaker says, did she tell you about her house? Martinez says that yes, he knows that she has to find a new place by November. And Whitaker says that he spoke to O'Neill, and he then goes into detail about this long conversation he had with O'Neill about certain issues she was facing in getting a new house. That's going to come up in recorded conversations later. Later on in the same recorded conversation, Martinez, they're still talking about O'Neill, says she was looking really good today. They start laughing, and Whitaker says, yeah, well, you make her laugh. We then heard, conversation continues, and we hear Whitaker say, so on Monday, I'll tell you what I'll do. Before you leave, I'll redo that invoice and I'll fix it so that you can electronically sign it. So you just sign it on your phone, and then I'll send it over to Sandra to save some steps, and then she can get it to Jenifer. Martinez says, yeah, you can do that. Alex Dempsey then says, okay, well, did you resubmit this invoice? This conversation, they're talking about resubmitting an inflated invoice. And Whitaker says, yes. We then see the inflated invoice as an exhibit. It's an invoice for $325,000. And Whitaker testified that the original invoice was for $40,000 less than this. So they've inflated by $40,000. We then go to another audio recording on November 3rd, and this is a three-way call between David Whitaker, Jenifer O'Neill, and Ray Martinez. And this is, again, a very jovial conversation. They're laughing. They're very, buddy-buddy and familiar with each other. O'Neill says, I have an idea to do this coffee shop in Yacht Haven Grand. The space is available. They then talk about how she doesn't want to pay that much per square foot. She asks David Whitaker how much he pays per square foot because he also had an office in Yacht Haven Grand. Jenifer O'Neill then says that she's, talked to David Whitaker a lot about this coffee shop plan. They then start talking about the food that'll be at the coffee shop, and they're laughing. And then they start talking about the food that Ray Martinez serves at Don Filito's, or will serve at Don Filito's cook shop. And Ray Martinez is laughing and says, this ain't the Encore, David. They all then laugh. Remember, the Encore is that luxury hotel in Boston that they stayed at, where they went to that very expensive steak dinner. Whitaker then says, hey, I just texted the butler. Martinez says, send me that text that the butler service is expected for the next trip, and let me know that Chris and the guys will be downstairs. Whitaker testified that Chris and the guys were the butlers, and all three of them, Martinez, Whitaker, and Jenifer O'Neill, are then heard laughing. Now, this was a very, long series of recordings we had heard, and I was very busy taking notes. But afterwards, I did look up at Jenifer O'Neill to see if there was any kind of reaction. And she was sitting there. She had a very tight-lipped smile while listening to all of this. Okay, so then Alex Dempsey asked Whitaker, around November 6th of 2023, did you talk to Ray Martinez about that grill that you bought for his house? Whitaker says, yes, they texted. So then we saw text messages introduced where Ray Martinez texts David Whitaker in November of 2023 and says, the grills I've secured. Oh, excuse me. He says, I've seasoned the steak and the grill is ready. Maybe I can get a consultation job with Rare, their steaks, my seasoning blends. Rare is that steakhouse that they went to in Boston. David Whitaker says, they look good. Jenifer is going to wish she had one. Then we move on to the next exhibit. It's another audio recording. This is between Ray Martinez and David Whitaker, again in November 2023. Ray Martinez says, Jenifer called me because the first invoice for $280,000, and then there was another invoice for $320,000. Whitaker says, yeah, correct. Because remember, Martinez cuts him off. Yeah, we added stuff to it. She sent me an email yesterday telling me it processed. I assume that means it was sent to finance. It would be great if they got it on the if they got it on the run today. Whitaker says, if we give the batch number to Anthony or maybe Jenifer can take care of it. Then we heard a lot more of the conversation, but I'm going to skip to the next important part. Whitaker said, Jenifer told me she hadn't found a place yet and that she's really stressing, like it's stressing her like crazy. Oh, no, excuse me, mistake here. Let me go back. Whitaker said, Jenifer told me she hadn't found a place yet. Ray Martinez then said, yeah, it's really stressing her out, stressing her like crazy. Whitaker said, I may start sending her money. Martinez says, yeah, it's a tough time for her. Then Martinez says, I'm struggling as well. And that reminds me, can we get tuition stuff paid by late December? Whitaker said, after this next payment, I can help. Martinez says, okay, I'll keep pushing it through. That would be a huge weight off of mine and Diana's shoulders. This is the tuition payment for Ray Martinez's children to private school. Alex Dempsey said, and did that invoice that they're talking about in this call that's going to be used to pay for the tuition, did that invoice eventually get approved? Whitaker said, yes, it did. It was for $325,000. Now we start talking about the third trip that Whitaker and Martinez took to Boston. They stayed at the same hotel, and their bill for that entire hotel stay was $25,000, over $25,000. Alexander Dempsey then asked if Ray Martinez had ever asked Whitaker again about paying his children's tuition. Whitaker said yes. We heard another audio recording, and this one was from December 7th of 2023, and it just happened to be a birthday. Ray Martinez was at a birthday party at his house when David Whitaker called. Ray Martinez picks up and says, yo, David. Whitaker wishes him a happy birthday. Martinez says, thanks so much, brother. I've had too many shots of tequila. I'm on the porch with Ludrick, Lamar, Sean, just everybody. Whitaker says, so when crime is up 70% tomorrow, we'll know why. They laugh. Martinez says, yeah, everybody loves this porch so much. Whitaker then changes the topic of conversation and says, oh, did Richard Velasquez get arrested? Now, Richard Velasquez still works for VIPD. He does something to do with firearm control, I believe. And the arrest they're talking about in December of 2023, Velasquez was arrested in Florida for disorderly intoxication, trespassing, and resisting arrest at a gentleman's club. Anyway, Martinez said, yeah, he was arrested. I spoke with the court marshals in Florida. Whitaker then jokingly says, I'm just glad he didn't burn anyone alive. They both start laughing. Going down the conversation, Whitaker says, so are you going into the office tomorrow? Martinez kind of laughs, says, email me, bro. I'll do everything from here, talking about his house. Whitaker then says, the school is 4,700, right? Martinez says, no, 4,100. Whitaker says, should I send it to Diana or you? Martinez says, send it to her. I'd appreciate that. Then we saw more text messages where Ray Martinez asks if a certain payment that he got was for the December reimbursement or for the January payment. Whitaker responds by saying that's for the school, for the kids' tuition. It doesn't matter what month. Martinez says, okay, thanks a million. And then we saw, receipts put up on the screen showing that that money went from Monethos's bank account to the bank account of Diana Martinez. Okay, moving on to the next exhibit. This is an audio recording. And in this, Ray Martinez says that they're talking about another inflated invoice. Ray Martinez said he already spoke to Jenifer O'Neill, who said that she sent the stuff in, so that money was online, but it probably wouldn't be paid because everything was currently shut down. This audio recording was on January 1st, 2024, so New Year's Day. They're not, banks aren't open. Then during the conversation, Ray is talking about how he really needs his restaurant to be open for carnival time because that's when it's going to get exposure, become hot, and really start earning money. Whitaker says, well, we can increase the amount of the invoice if you want to try. Like I said, it's going to be small this month. Martinez says, that's what I was going to tell you. I know we had spoken about increasing the December invoice so that we could order equipment. Are you still open to that? Because I really need to get this shit going, man. Whitaker says, yeah, I can do that. Martinez says, yeah, let's go ahead and increase it so we can get that stuff done, and I'll put both of them through tomorrow. Whitaker says, okay, how much do you want me to put on there? Martinez says 70-some thousand, I think. Then Whitaker says hold on, let me just look through this. Okay, Martinez, after saying that he thinks he wants it to be 70,000, Martinez then says, since it's through the stuff from Jenifer, I should be able to push that through quickly. Whew, okay, so then we heard the rest of that conversation. Whitaker says, okay, so I'll put that up. And the 70,000 is good. Talking about that 70,000 inflation. Martinez says, yeah, it's good. So what would 70 bring it to? To 210? Then he says, which is a little less than the last one was, correct? Whitaker says that they were talking about, and then when asked about by the attorney outside of the recording in his testimony, Whitaker says he was talking about adding a line item of $70,000 for Ray Martinez's expenses to that inflated invoice. Now, it has been a long night. I know a lot of exhibits, a lot of testimony and everything. So what actually happened was Alex Dempsey, the prosecutor, said that he wasn't even going to go into the next invoice because that was going to, into the next exhibit, because that was going to put things well over the 5:30 p.m. End time that had been decided with the jury. So the jury was then dismissed, and the court was over for the day. The judge said we would resume tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. But just as a note for you all, we have not yet reached the conclusion of the United States doing their direct examination of Whitaker. That's expected to go through into a good amount of tomorrow. After that, it's then going to be the defense's turn to cross-examine Whitaker. So Whitaker and all of this detail that I just gave you, I know it might have seemed like a lot, but it's important because this is going to be the topic of the next several days of trial. So thank you for, staying with me tonight and hearing about all of this. I will be back tomorrow evening after another full day of court for another edition of Trial Watch. Thank you for being here. Have a good evening.